The allegations against P. Diddy just keep on coming, this time from a British TV host with hundreds of thousands of Instagram followers. Now, she's revealing the shocking details of Diddy's parties with guest lists of underage girls whose drinks were laced with drugs. It's just another accusation in a long list of others, all alleging a pattern of abuse at the hands of Diddy spanning decades. 54-year-old Sean P. Diddy Combs is nearing the 1-month mark of life behind bars. The disgraced music icon has spent the past several weeks at the Metropolitan Detention Center in New York. This comes after Diddy's arrest on September 16th, when a grand jury indicted him on charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy has appeared in court several times since his arrest and made several attempts at bail, one of which is still pending. But for now, he's being held in a protective care unit at MDC Brooklyn. He's pleaded not guilty to the charges and just last week was assigned a May 2025 trial date. In the past, Diddy's attorney has been outspoken, saying Diddy's side of the story will be told when it comes time for trial. One of his defense attorneys, Mark Agnifilo, actually even said Diddy plans to testify when it comes time for trial. Now, that still remains to be seen, but we can make an educated guess that the witness testimony will be pretty compelling and likely from a lot of survivors. The federal indictment mentions only one listed as victim one. Now, their name isn't included, but we can infer that victim one is actually Cassandra Ventura. She's also known as the singer Cassie, who dated Diddy for several years, starting when she was just a teenager. Cassie filed civil suit against Diddy in November of last year, introducing us to the phrase freak-offs. This was once again defined in the federal indictment as elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. This is all part of Diddy's alleged scheme. He would drug women or spike their drinks, sexually assault them, and or force them to have sex with a prostitute, all while he's recording. Now, it's these recordings that led to Diddy's arrest, as the feds collected some during the raids of his home back in March. Okay, I know you're multitasking when you're watching our videos, and if you're out and about running errands, listen up. I have to tell you about the free app Upside that gives you cash back on daily essentials. It's something I use every time I pump my gas because it's so easy and it's free, so why not? Okay, all you have to do is get the Upside app and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. So you pay as usual and then just follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on the screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. But back to Cassie. Her lawsuit with Diddy was settled just one day after it was filed, but it was too late. Since then, more than a dozen civil suits have been filed against Diddy, all laying out the similar pattern of abuse. We can also expect more than 100 new civil lawsuits to be filed against Diddy over the next few weeks. This was announced by Houston-based attorney Tony Busby, who alleges he received literally thousands of calls from survivors, all claiming to have been sexually assaulted by Diddy. There are other allegations that high-profile celebrities took part in these freak-offs and sexual assaults. And that leads us to the newest allegation, coming from Precious Muir, a British TV host who has thousands of followers on Instagram. Muir says she moved to New York in 2005 and was told that she needed to network to make a name for herself in the entertainment industry. That led Muir to some of Diddy's parties, where she allegedly witnessed some sinister actions, young girls being drugged against their will and forced to have sex. She told the Daily Mail, quote, "I wanted to be invited and be around these amazing and incredible people, so if you had the opportunity, you went. Back then, we didn't have the luxury of social media and Instagram to message a brand directly. Going to parties weren't just an option, but they were part of our job." According to Muir, shuttles or SUVs with tinted windows would pick up girls and take them to these Diddy parties that oftentimes had some major celebrity names. Muir says she was warned not to smoke any weed there because Diddy would apparently sprinkle stuff in it. On top of that, the vodka shots were apparently laced with drugs. At one point, Muir says she had a drink that was spiked, causing half of her face to go numb. She said, quote, "I truly believe that not participating in drugs prevented me from going into a dark place that many other girls went to." During this era, Muir says she met Diddy and Cassie, who were dating. She says Diddy was obviously the leader of the pack, who took advantage of young girls who had showbiz dreams. It didn't matter if the girls were underage either. Muir says it was not a place for children as there was nudity and sex, but that didn't stop Diddy from recruiting young women, allegedly. Muir says, quote, I saw people hooking up sexually. When I went to the bathroom, I saw condom wrappers and fragments of cocaine on the side with whatever thing they used to sniff it. She went on to say that as the leader, Diddy was never told no. She said, quote, you can sense that he has a lot of confidence and that he likes to be in control and tell his inner circle what to do. And I don't think anyone ever really says no to him. Security guards were apparently also present at these parties, who were on the watch for anyone who pulled out their phones to take pics or videos. These personal recordings were not allowed, but Diddy himself was allowed to record. And according to Muir, there were cameras scattered around the rooms recording everything. Now, according to the federal indictment that was filed decades after these parties, Diddy would use these same recordings as blackmail against the survivors, saying he would release it if they spoke up about this alleged abuse. It's just one more shocking allegation that adds to the case against Diddy. To understand what all this new information means for Diddy's case, we're talking to former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Mike Korbanix. We're talking about P. Diddy yet again, and I don't know if I'm surprised or what that we have another allegation that another person's coming forward and saying, hey, I went to those freak-offs, I saw what it was all about. What are you thinking when you hear that yet another person's coming forward with these accusations?
Well, it's difficult to see because there's so many people coming forward that I think there's going to be a very big question by the defense as to what exactly is admissible. And if this person was actually a victim or were just at a party where they saw things that necessarily weren't illegal if they weren't a victim and didn't see exactly what made it illegal. So that's an interesting question here because I don't think some of the people were actually victims that are coming forward. They saw things, but I don't know if they saw all the details. And especially when it gets to be an issue of sexual assaults or things of that nature is, did they hear non-consent or consent where it was coming? So I think we're going to hear some new areas of admissibility of evidence in this case that we haven't heard before.
Yeah, that's a good point. This person, Precious, who she has like a massive following on Instagram, she's not alleging that she was sexually assaulted, just that she witnessed some questionable things at these freak-offs. And I do think you brought up a good point about the defense. They're going to want to know, okay, is she just there saying, you know, she saw it? What can come in? And I guess that leads to my next question here. She says she moved to New York in 2005, and these freak-offs that she saw apparently happened way back then. But now we're in 2024. So could any of that even be admissible anyway?
Well, it depends upon when exactly and what's covering the time frame of these episodes. Was it a continuing conspiracy? Because that always will lengthen the statute of limitations as to usually it goes to when the last event occurred, not necessarily when it stopped. But these are all going to be very interesting questions because it's very unusual that you have a trial that goes over such a long period of time with such a variety of people. And I think that's going to be another question too, is by having so many victims in one indictment, is the defendant being prejudiced because people are going to hear so many different witnesses that are they going to accept that that witness is just for that incident, or are they going to let it roll over into, well, the other person said that as well? That has some serious constitutional questions.
Yeah, when we're talking about the number of people who are alleging these acts of violence at the hands of Diddy, I mean, we're at hundreds. I mean, thousands, actually, if you believe some of the attorneys who are saying, okay, yeah, 12,000 people are calling us reporting that they were allegedly sexually assaulted by Diddy. So dozens, hundreds, thousands. I mean, a lot of people are saying that they were sexually assaulted by P. Diddy. And that brings into question when it comes time for this trial, which I guess now is May of next year, when it comes time, how many of these victims or survivors are going to testify? I mean, that's obviously an overwhelming number of people, but what do you think the prosecution would want to bring to make sure that their case is as good as it can get?
Well, I would think the prosecution, if they have a strong case, would want to bring less than more and rely on quality and not quantity, because you've got to have witnesses that are coming straight forward and not opening doors for the defense to create reasonable doubt as to whether or not these people are in fact credible or not. I think a big question is going to be, as well as if you were a victim, why did it take you so many years to come forward? Or were you just a victim because things didn't work out because you're hoping to advance? And that's going to be a very interesting question. It may not sound like the nicest questions to ask, but it is a question when you're defending someone to see if they're proving beyond a reasonable doubt whether or not that person did not consent to what happened.
And I do think you're bringing up a good point here in that there's so many people who are coming forward that the defense obviously has to be asking a couple of questions. P. Diddy's a huge name, and we've been talking about him, for months at this point. And now I'm wondering the defense will probably say something like, okay, this is very opportunistic of you. If you actually were sexually assaulted, again, to your point, Mike, why did it take you so long to come forward? So are these things that the defense is going to go through and vet if and when it comes time for all of these witnesses that they know are going to be called for the future trial? Are they going to go through and really make sure that these people have airtight stories?
Oh, absolutely. That's part of our obligation as defense attorneys. I've been on both sides as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, and you have to prepare to make sure that those questions are going to be asked that are relevant to the case, but do not prejudice the jury as to what they're going to decide. And you have to make sure that these witnesses have credibility and what were the reasons. If it was one of the reasons they delayed was because they had some, and there are some experts who will testify that there's mental health issues that may prevent somebody from reporting something because they're afraid, or was it that I was willing to do this as long as I advanced in my career? And that's going to be the interesting question, I think. I haven't seen all the discovery in this matter, but that's going to be the interesting question as to where this is going to go forward.
And the reason we're talking about this story today at all is because this woman, Precious, came forward and is talking about these freak offs. And that's really the topic we've been talking about almost a month now, at least. But as far as what she's talking about, the allegations, sexual assault is really tough to talk about at all. But now she's bringing else something else forward, rather, and it's that there was child sexual assault. She's saying that these places were not appropriate for children, and yet they were there. She's saying she potentially witnessed some of this. And what's interesting, though, is that in the federal indictment, we don't see any charges for child sex crimes. But there are people who have come forward, in addition to Precious, other people who are saying that it happened when they were under age 18. So what do you think? Do you think that federal prosecutors are considering all this information?
I am sure they are. The federal prosecutors don't just come forward momentarily or quickly. They haven't even brought charges until after a couple of years of investigation. So it will be interesting to see what they have and what they're going to use. Just because they have it doesn't mean they're going to use it. But obviously, for it taking so long, it would appear that each time they opened the door, another door opened, and that's why the investigation kept going, because one person introduced to another person, and that could be problematic for the defense.
One of the reasons I like to talk to you specifically, Mike, is because you have background on both sides of things. So we talked about the defense, but also the prosecution, because you've been in a prosecutor's office yourself. And put yourself back in that state. If you are one of the ones who's working on this P. Diddy case, how do you even begin? I know that they brought these charges. Obviously, there's been a lot of investigation. They wrote their indictment, all of that. But now there's dozens, again, hundreds, thousands, maybe people coming forward saying that they were assaulted. They saw something. They might have videos, recordings, whatever it may be. If you're a prosecutor, how are you dealing with all this excess information?
Well, I think first what you're going at is seeing which is the information that's the strongest. And those cases are the ones you're going. The ones that have the strongest evidence are the ones you want to proceed with. There's only so many convictions he needs, or the government needs to get in this case, to put him in for almost a life sentence at his age and what the capability is, 20 years, 30 years. Could there be things that go to life? There has to be looking in it. And also the question is, if each incident was a separate incident, those could be run consecutively. So those could add up to life sentences in no amount of time.
This case is just fascinating in so many levels because it's like more people come forward every single day. And yet there's still so much that we as the public don't know, which we'll likely learn again when it goes to trial. And as of now, that's set for May of next year. So Diddy was arrested September 16th, and now he's set to go to trial less than a year later in May. Is that enough time for either side? I know it's his right, obviously, to go to trial, but wouldn't they want a little more time to prepare?
Well, especially nowadays, and I'm not saying this to be funny, but everything is download a computer for evidence, download this and that, and that takes a lot of time to prepare for either the prosecution or the defense. I mean, it could be a 5-minute phone call. Well, that's easy for someone who was on that 5-minute phone call to interpret. But for a prosecutor or defense attorney, that 5-minute phone call could take hours to go through to make sure you understand what are they talking about? What does this insinuate? Where is this going? So with all the technology that is now being used in investigations, I think this is going to take a lot more time to prepare for trial than they're saying. And if it gets pushed, isn't that giving the defense an appealable issue right there if they didn't have enough time to prepare and give effective assistance of counsel?
That's a good point because as defense attorneys, I'm sure they're always thinking, obviously preparing for this case, but appeals, that will be a big thing too. I mean, is that something that Diddy's defense is kind of keeping in mind throughout all of this?
Well, I guess theoretically, but being a trial lawyer is you don't want to depend on appeals. You want to depend on winning. You want to depend on making sure that the government doesn't prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. But also, as well as you have to be aware of what could be coming in and what could be prejudicial. Now, quite frankly, the government worries greatly about that as well. Is if we have all these witnesses, we want to make sure, I would think, that we're not bringing witnesses that will put some sort of question as to the evidence we're producing for this prosecution. So they may not, well, they may have thousands of witnesses. They may want to really cut down and say, which are the witnesses that are the strongest in the proofs and will be the most to assure us that there is no reasonable doubt in front of the jury as to whether or not he's guilty.
Talking about those witnesses that will undoubtedly be called for the prosecution. I know that this is something really tough to talk about because we are dealing with sexual assault, that these are survivors here, obviously a really traumatizing time in their life, but they're going to have to go up on a stand and recount all of this. And in some cases, there's photos, videos, audio recording of these really, traumatizing and graphic moments from their lives. Is this something that prosecutors are going to keep in mind? The fact that you're going to have this witness on the stand who could break down. I mean, I probably would be breaking down seeing myself in some sort of situation like this. So is that something they're going to keep in mind to make sure they can get the testimony they want, but also make sure to maintain the integrity of the case and deal with them and their trauma?
Well, that's always a difficult situation, especially like when you have families in a murder case, when you have families testifying. I mean, it's emotional. And it does bring up those emotions, especially, there's a lot of experts who will say victims of sexual assault don't always come immediately forward with it. It takes a while for them to be comfortable and where they're going and to even have to open that up to the public in a courtroom. That's rather difficult. So these things are all things that need to be dealt with, but you have to let the witness be who the witness is. And that's the only way they're going to have credibility in front of a jury. That's just my opinion.
Talking a lot about the witnesses, obviously what they saw, and circling back to the story that we're talking about today, the specific woman, Precious. Again, she didn't say that she was sexually assaulted, but she did witness some things. Do you think it's possible that the defense, or the prosecution rather, would call some of these people who were at these parties, who allegedly saw some of these incidents happening? Do you think that these people could be called at all?
Well, I think, yes, they could be called because they sort of give credibility to the government calling them as the witnesses because they're not victims and they're just telling you what they saw. So they can't be something that would be brought up on cross-examination is, oh, they're just in it for a civil suit. They want to make some money. they didn't get what they wanted, so now it's a problem. So that is, I think, a very strong type of witness for the government and a very difficult witness for the defense.
And the underlying theme we're talking about throughout all of this, because these allegations are so horrific and traumatizing, is that it does sometimes happen where these people don't come forward right away. This is something that you pointed out. I mean, they're going through it internally, whatever it may be, that they come out years later. So the defense is questioning this, but the prosecution, again, you're saying they may bring some sort of expert testimony to say, yeah, it's normal, there's studies, whatever it may be. But in this case of Precious coming forward years after this happened, do you think that kind of goes in the vein of the situation? Obviously, she wasn't traumatized firsthand, but even witnessing some of this emotionally impacted situations, do you think it's possible that's why it took her so long to come forward with all this?
Yeah, it could be. It could be the fact that she didn't feel, someone couldn't have felt comfortable, or someone could have felt in fear because of the fame of the person they're talking about, what they saw and what they witnessed at these parties. I don't know enough about what they saw or witnessed, but were they afraid of people who were there? Did they feel intimidated? Did they feel that they were basically saying, whatever you do here is okay because I'm here and you invited me, so I'll keep my mouth shut? That could be a whole bunch of things. Or it could just be that how many times do anybody, normal people, look back at something that happened previously and not realize the effect it had, and all of a sudden it comes to some sort of eye-opening experience that, wow, that was a lot worse than I thought it was back then, and now I need to do something about that.
This next question, just to wrap it up, is kind of speculation, but I'm interested to see what you have to say. We've spoken a lot about the prosecution and what they have. We read it through the indictment. We've seen some of the things that were collected during the raids. What do you think, in your expert opinion? Do they have a strong case against Diddy?
It's too difficult for me to say right now because I don't know what all the evidence is, quite frankly. But it does seem, anytime the federal government comes across with a prosecution that they've been investigating for this amount of time, it's something that a defense attorney has to look at very seriously and where they're going with it. And it's just something that needs to be taken one step at a time. And at the end of the day, what sometimes we forget is the ultimate decision is upon the jurors, not the prosecutor, not the defense attorney. It's how the jury looks at that evidence and testimony, and do they find that the government came and met the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning like, this, I think, may have happened, but you know what? I'm not really sure because of why people reacted who were alleged victims in here. Does that bring us to the high standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt?
Mike, I'm glad that you brought that up because that's what it is. It's up to the jury at the end of it, all of this. So we'll see which way they go. It's important to note that Diddy has pleaded not guilty to all the charges against him. After his arrest, his attorney, Mark Agnifilo, released a statement reading in part, quote, "Sean Diddy Combs is a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person, but is not criminal. To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with the investigation. Please reserve your judgment until you have all the facts. These are the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he looks forward to clearing his name in court." For Law&Crime News, I'm Sierra Gillespie.